As you can see, I'm here on the Mount of Olives, and I'm looking for cracks that you can see actually here in the flooring in the...
The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus. That's when excavators dug below the original level of the 4th century church.
If you look at the road over here, you can see that there's cracks that are starting to crack on the road. There's some large potholes that have been started to form over here.
Throughout the centuries, Christians have long anticipated the return of Jesus Christ, the promised King and Redeemer who will establish his eternal kingdom. One of the most intriguing questions surrounding this blessed hope is where Jesus will return. Among all the locations tied to biblical prophecy, the Mount of Olives, situated just east of the old city of Jerusalem, holds a central place in the hearts of believers and scholars alike. This sacred mountain is not only a geographical landmark, but also a deeply prophetic site mentioned in both Old and New Testament scripture. Many Christians believe that the Mount of Olives will serve as the exact place where Christ's return to earth will unfold, fulfilling ancient prophecies and marking the climax of God's redemptive plan. The Mount of Olives rises to the east of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley, and has been a site of immense biblical significance for thousands of years. It was here that King David fled during Absalom's rebellion, 2 Samuel 15:30. And here, where the prophet Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord depart from the temple and rest upon the mountain, Ezekiel 11:23. The Mount of Olives also served as a place of prayer, reflection, and teaching during the life of Jesus. The Gospels record that Jesus often retreated to this mountain, and some of his most profound teachings, including the Olivet Discourse about the end times, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, were given there. This makes the Mount of Olives not only historically significant, but also deeply connected to Christ's prophetic ministry. One of the strongest biblical foundations for the belief that Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives is found in the Old Testament book of Zechariah. Zechariah 14:4 declares, "On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley." This prophecy speaks of the day when the Lord will come to fight against the nations gathered against Jerusalem. The image is dramatic and powerful. The physical return of the Lord to this specific mountain will be accompanied by a cosmic and geographical transformation, signaling the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. For Christians, this passage is seen as a direct prophecy of Christ's second coming. In addition to Zechariah, the New Testament reinforces the connection between the Mount of Olives and Christ's return. After his resurrection, Jesus ascended into heaven from the Mount of Olives, specifically near Bethany, Luke 24:50, Acts 1:9-12. As the disciples stood gazing into the sky, 2 angels appeared and declared, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." Acts 1:11. Luke, the writer of Acts, makes a point to note that this event took place at the Mount of Olives. The implication is clear. Just as Jesus ascended from this mountain, he will one day return to it in glory. The Mount of Olives is also central in Jewish eschatology, which adds another layer of importance to its role in prophecy. Jewish tradition holds that when the Messiah comes, the resurrection of the dead will begin on the Mount of Olives. This belief is reflected in the massive Jewish cemetery that covers its slopes, one of the oldest and most significant in the world. Generations of Jewish people have desired to be buried there, with the hope that they would be among the first to rise when the Messiah comes. For Christians, this tradition harmonizes with the prophecy in Zechariah and the angelic declaration in Acts, pointing again to the mountain as the site of Messiah's ultimate triumph. When considering whether Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives, it is also important to recognize the spiritual symbolism of this location. The Mount of Olives was a place of intimacy and struggle for Jesus. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane, located at the foot of the mountain, where he prayed in deep agony before his arrest and crucifixion. His tears and sweat of blood in that place reflected the weight of the world's sin that he carried. How fitting, then, that the place of his deepest surrender would also be the place of his ultimate victory. The very ground that once bore witness to his anguish will one day witness his glory. Furthermore, the Mount of Olives provides a visual connection to Jerusalem itself, From its slopes, one has a panoramic view of the Temple Mount and the Old City. This site underscores the prophetic vision of Christ ruling and reigning from Jerusalem, as foretold in Isaiah 2:3, which says, "For out of Zion shall go the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." The Mount of Olives, facing directly toward the heart of the city, is therefore a natural stage for the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel and to the nations. For Christians, the question of Jesus' return to the Mount of Olives is not merely a matter of geography or historical curiosity. It is a reminder of God's faithfulness and the certainty of His promises. While the exact timing of Christ's return remains unknown, Scripture assures us that He will come again, and the Mount of Olives stands as a prophetic marker of that reality. As believers, our focus should not be on speculating about the day or the hour, but on living faithfully and expectantly, preparing our hearts for the return of the King. The Mount of Olives holds a unique and central place in biblical prophecy concerning the second coming of Jesus Christ. From Zechariah's vision of the Lord's feet standing upon it, to the angelic promise at His ascension, to the symbolic power of its geography, the evidence points to this sacred mountain as the stage for one of history's greatest climactic events. Will Jesus return to the Mount of Olives? Scripture strongly affirms it. And when that day comes, it will not only shake the earth beneath Jerusalem, but also usher in the fulfillment of God's kingdom on earth. Until then, Christians are called to watch, pray, and remain steadfast in the hope of His glorious appearing.